internal team, and that seemed like a good place to kind of get the ball rolling on continuous improvement. You know, it was something that we had a lot of control over. We could start, you know, kind of breaking it down and seeing what we could do differently. So that was kind of where everything started. But we also looked at property management, and this isn't real estate, this is surplus property. So at the end of life, goods and equipment, the process that we use to dispose of that. And then lastly, we looked at e-procurement. And Alaska, we implemented our e-procurement system in 2015. We went from paper to electronic procurement pretty much overnight. And so the implementation, we're a very big state geographically, and we wanted a standard way for agencies to use it. And so there was kind of a learning curve of people getting used to, okay, what all can this system do? Once we kind of hit a plateau there, then we kind of came in and said, okay, let's standardize this process. And so we worked with all of our agencies to come up with a standard process there. And I would be remiss if I did not mention all of the people that were behind these three projects. It wasn't one or two people. There were a lot of people, and part of continuous improvement is making sure that the people closest to the work, the people actually performing the work, they have the best ideas of what we can improve, what can be done, what can be changed. And so, you know, I'm not going to go through all of these people because there were a lot, but these are the people that really, you know, got in, dug into our processes, figured out how it could be made better, and then did the work to make it better. So I just want to make sure that, you know, we acknowledge all of these folks. It was certainly a team effort, and you know, proud of all of the work that they did that helped us get to where we are now, where, you know, get to present. It's an honor and a privilege. So I want to talk first about our investment in this effort, in these efforts. So we're talking about these same three projects. Between the three of them, we spent less than $1,500 in hard costs. So the money we did spend was, you know, conference room space. Largely, we tried to, we did a pretty good job negotiating rates and getting that as low as we could. And there were some out-of-pocket expenses, personal out-of-pocket expenses for the facilitators. You know, we'd chip in and make sure snacks and refreshments were provided, just because our state procurement rules around food and drink is a little bit convoluted. So we said, you know what, let's just, we'll do this out of pocket. So, you know, add $100 here and there, but $1,500, we're not talking about a large investment. We had no new technology investments. We didn't have to go out and procure a big, you know, system to make this stuff work. We didn't have to get new software. We didn't have to get new hardware. This was all just looking at a process and making it better. We spent 4 days on the largest project, so that was our e-procurement project. We took a total of 4 days and, you know, broke it down. What are we doing now? Where's the waste? What's actually adding value? And then we started over from scratch, and people, you know, contributed to a transformed process that focused on delivering value. So every step that went into that new process was questioned. Why are we doing this? Does it have a purpose? So that was the largest project. You know, for the alternate procurement project that we did in-house, that was a matter of hours spread out over a matter of months that we worked on that. So we have a pretty large spread of time that these can take. But so 4-day event at the max. And then we met once a week for 3 to 6 months. So it wasn't, you know, okay, that's our new process, we're done. It was, okay, that's our new process. How do we make it work? How do we make that part of our day-to-day? And so we would get the team together once a week for, you know, up to 6 months. The 3 months was that property management, 6 months was the e-procurement, and say, all right, people took on various tasks. Where are we at with that? Have you hit a roadblock? If you have, what can we do to overcome it? You know, do we need to escalate? Do we need to talk to somebody else outside of the team? So we just made sure that we kept the ball rolling. And that's a really key part to all of this. You can't have a continuous improvement project be that thing you did once and forgot about and just, okay, it happened. You really need that investment in making it happen. And these processes, we're going to visit again. So we've already improved them. We've saved all this time and saved all this money. Now it's getting close to, this was 2017 and 2018, it's getting close to time that we revisit these processes and look for improvements on the improved process. That's what makes this process continuous. And lastly, in an ideal world, we're all, part of our job duty is looking at what we do and feeling empowered, feeling authorized to make improvements as we go. Sometimes we might have to run it by somebody to say like, hey, I want to do this. Can I have your support in trying it? Sure, try it, try it small scale, see what happens. So ideally, that's part of our just day-to-day existence, doing work in state government or whatever government, whatever workplace we might be in. But some people do want to attach a cost to that time that was spent. And actually that's great, because that gives us a really good way to determine how much we are saving, because a lot of what we did was about saving time for employees involved in these various processes. So we, calculated it out, the number of hours that, up to 17 people spent in a room, and then over the next 3 to 6 months came out to less than $100,000. And that's a fully loaded cost. So think of that as we talk about what our return on this was. So less than $1,500 actually spent on stuff, up to 6 months of time, worth less than $100,000. And that's Alaska pricing. So we pay, up to like $10 for a gallon of milk in some parts of our state. So, keep that in mind as well. So now talking about what our return on that was. When you calculate out, when we looked at all of these processes and we looked at what we were doing before and created a benchmark, what our new process was or is currently, and what the time difference is in there, all of the math is in our submission. But when you total that up, 118,000 employee hours saved per year. So that's not a one-time, time savings. That's every year. We do these processes every year, 118,000 hours. So that sounds like a lot. To put it in perspective, that's 4,925 days of time every single year that has been given back to employees. 700 weeks, 160 months, or 13.5 years. Over a decade of time was saved across these three processes every year. It's crazy, right? So that is time that can now be spent. So that's spread across, all of the employees that touch this process, across every single iteration. But that's time that those employees can now spend on other things. And a really important piece of continuous improvement, lean, any of this, these methodologies is we're not doing this to try to get rid of people. And that's a really important thing. People will sometimes, approach these continuous improvement efforts or initiatives thinking that, well, it's about, eliminating positions or something like that. It's really about letting people do the job they were meant to do. So if you think about, if we can take out all of that wasteful activity that goes on that we don't even think about, we just do it because that's how it's always been done. If we can take that out and give time back to people that they can, actually do their work, the job that they signed on to do, they're going to be happier. And, we're all going to be happier. I know, these processes all involve me at some point in my role. And it's really great to see, my team is, humming along with these processes. I'm involved, I'm in the loop on them. I know exactly what my role and responsibility is, where before it was, maybe not that clear. So again, it's about having people be more they are feeling more valuable to the organization, to the team, and as a result, it's like falling in love with your job again. It's crazy, but we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. In terms of, we talked about employee time, or those soft costs associated with time. So 13.5 years, when we did the math, comes out to about $6.1 million worth of time saved every year. So those are soft costs. Those aren't, we're going to see a $6.1 million return to our general fund, but that is time that can be spent doing things that does produce a savings, or that does, result in value added benefits to the state. And so when you look at that in terms of what we spent to get there, we're talking about a 6,100% return on investment. That's pretty good, right? So now I know you're thinking, that sounds awesome. We've heard this before. How do we do any of this? Or, this is just another fad. It's really not. Continuous improvement has been around for a very long time. We're talking since the 50s, 40s, 50s. So none of this is rocket science. It's not new. It doesn't require new technology or anything. It's really just a matter of building a culture and changing the culture in your workplace to focus on delivering value and eliminating waste. And so if we are in procurement to deliver value, that's usually, our primary objective is to say, look, we, are ultimately at the beck and call of the public. That's who we want to deliver value for. We have our various customers, but ultimately it's the public out there, which includes ourselves. The opposite of that then is waste. If we can get rid of waste as much as we can, then that's more time spent delivering value. How can we then identify what is wasteful? This acronym was one of the first things that myself and my team learned, and it was awesome. It helped us see the world, like literally personal life, professional life, everything, helped us see things in a different way. We could identify what was waste and what was value added. So downtime, the D stands for defects. In our world, that's a typo. It's a form that's not filled out. In our personal life, it might be, we buy something and it's broken and we send it back. That's a defect. Overproduction, this is batching things. There's a little saying, batching is bad, variance is evil. So batching, this is one of the worst ones, because when you batch a job, like, okay, we think we need to do 50 of these. We're just going to bang them all out at once. It actually increases the chances that you'll run into or incur these other types of waste, because you're so focused on production. You might be duplicating a defect each one of those 50 times, and you won't catch it until the end. And then how many of us have been asked to do work just in case, and then nobody ever asks for it? That's overproduction. It's wasteful, and we want to avoid it as much as possible. One of the things the very, very first things that we looked at, that my team identified as, a problem that we wanted to dive deeper into, was what we call the top 20 report. And this was this savings report that we would produce annually. And we talked through it and figured out that between, the team and myself, we spent about 750 hours per year on this report. And that's a big number. We could spend 750 hours doing other things, right? We finally got to the end and asked, who asks for this report? Nobody knew. Even I didn't know. I know we did it. I know we'd always done it. I've worked for the state for 20 years. I didn't know who was actually asking for it. And so it's like, well, maybe we collect the data this year and maybe don't spend 750 hours compiling this giant report and see what happens. And sure enough, no one asked for it. We have different ways to report that in a much more automated way now, because it still was valuable information, but not to the extent that we were we're producing that report just in case. So overproduction is a big one. Waiting, obviously, any time that you're waiting for something to be done, an approval, waiting for the copy machine to finish, that's wasteful time. Non-utilization, this is another big one in our space, because if we have a teammate, an employee, a colleague, somebody that's not being asked to use their brain, we're just following a process for the sake of following process and not thinking about it. That's non-utilization. We want to make sure that we're utilizing people's talent as much as we can. It makes them feel, more needed and valuable. It produces more of a result for everybody. It's just a better way to approach what we do. Transportation, this is anytime we have to send an email off to another office to get an approval or get feedback. We might have to, DHL, or DHL doesn't do domestic anymore. That dates me a little bit. We might have to FedEx overnight a set of forms somewhere to be reviewed and signed and sent back. If we can eliminate that, a lot of what we do has been converted to electronic. And so that eliminates a lot of that wasted time just waiting for something to get from point A to point B. But even then, does it even need to go from point A to point B? Can we figure out another way to do it? So that's kind of what we think of when we say transportation. Information. In manufacturing, the I here is inventory. There's a cost in some of our world. If we have a warehouse, inventory carries a cost, right? Same is true for information. If we're collecting information that we don't need, there's a cost to all of that. There's a cost for the person filling it out. There's a cost for the person who's reviewing it. And then there's a cost to store it somewhere, whether it's hard copy or electronic. There's a cost to all of that. So we want to minimize the information that we're getting so that we're only getting the information we need when we need it. If that makes sense. Just in time information, really. The M is motion. So anytime we have to move within our office, and it honestly, like when we talk about continuous improvement, it's not just in a process of like, dealing with alternate procurements or e-procurement. It could be something as simple as, when we build a continuous improvement culture, people within that workplace will do things like, oh, hey, we do a lot of work at the copy machine, but the recycle bin is, 15 feet away. That's motion. I have to walk, that 15 feet to take, paper that's being recycled over to the recycle bin. Why don't we move the recycle bin closer to the copy machine? It's simple, but it's effective. I mean, each one of those things has a value to it. If we minimize that motion, we've saved that person time, and we can refocus on delivering value. So all of these things can be really small opportunities, but they all add up. So that's motion. Intra-office movement of things. And then excess processing. So anytime we do more than what is asked for or what is required, and I want to make a distinction. Sometimes going above and beyond is great. We're actually delivering extra value for our customer above and beyond what they expected, and that's fantastic. Like, that is a goal that we should focus on. If we're looking at customer service, we want to make sure that we're going that extra step when we can. Excess processing is maybe something that makes us feel good, but the customer is never going to notice it. In our personal life, it might be something that we wouldn't pay extra for. We're like, oh, that's great, I guess, but I'm not going to give you more money for it. So think of it in that way. Excess processing, just doing more than is required to get the job done and doesn't add any value to that end product. Okay, so that's downtime. When this was shared with myself and my team, it really was like this aha moment of, wow, now we walk anywhere and you can see, oh, there's a defect. Oh, they're batching, stuff over there. Why are we doing that? Are we going to really use all of that? Why are we waiting for this? Do we need to get this approval? So you start seeing things in a different way. And I really like, you can break this down. We're talking about some pretty complicated processes, but you can simplify it. So think about you, if you drink coffee or, replace coffee with tea or another beverage, think about yourself as a customer ordering a cup of coffee. Value is what you are willing to pay for. It's the things and the actions that the barista does that transforms these raw ingredients into coffee, into hot coffee or iced coffee, whatever. So things like grinding the beans and heating water to the right temperature, pouring it into a cup, using the right filters, like all of that is transforming something from a raw ingredient or a raw piece of whatever into this final cup of coffee. And that's what you're paying for. Waste is at best what you wouldn't be willing to pay for. Like, you don't care that it's happening. And at worst, it's what would make you ask for a refund. So is the coffee too hot or too cold? That's a defect. You would probably send it back, right? If you're waiting too long, you may leave because it's so much waste that it builds up. And those are the obvious kinds. There might be stuff behind it that is going on and you just don't see it, and it contributes to a defect or that waiting. So some of the waste is obvious. Some might not be so obvious. If they're a disorganized coffee shop, that might contribute to the waiting. They're not using their equipment or their team to the full capacity, that kind of stuff. So it's really helpful to think about it in that respect. You can simplify the things we do into, these really obvious things. I will tell you on this next slide, these are things that we've actually seen as we've gone through and we say, all right, let's identify waste in a process. Let's break it down and see how it looks. We see things like people double checking other people's work. It might, be that somebody at some point made a mistake. And so, new process. We're going to have employee A double check employee B's math because, one time a mistake was made. This is the process forevermore. Okay. Multiple approval levels. So, on our property management process, we saw up to 7 approvals to get rid of pretty minimally valued equipment. 7 approval levels. So pretty crazy. Multiple approvals. Disorganization, somebody needing to go to this office for some of this information, maybe needs to go back again at some point later in the process, needs to go to another teammate for more information, so kind of not an organized process, a lot of just disconnected seeking of information and bringing that together into a final product. Batching, of course, hey, we know based on last year's numbers that we're going to do 50 of these things. So we're going to make 50 of them now and hand them out as needed. Oh, you know what? Maybe we only did 20. Maybe our, a budget took a hit and only 15 of these were authorized. So, there is a downside to batching. Underusing talent. Again, going back to like that double checking instance, if we're not trusting an employee to do the math correctly, what does that say, about and these were, professional level employees. These are people that should be able to do math and be held accountable for doing correct math. And maybe it's necessary, for somebody to take a look at it at some point to say, yep, okay, it's out the door now. But this was down to a level that, okay, I'm double checking your math. If you made a mistake, I'm going to fix it and send it out. That doesn't have the person use their brain, right? That's not holding them accountable for the work. We should have been going back to the employee and saying, hey, we noticed this. What happened? How can we fix it? And what I like to do with this, so these are things we've actually seen in our processes: double checking, multiple approvals, disorganization, batching, and underusing talent. Now put this in context of ordering coffee. Okay, think of standing in line, waiting for your coffee, you place your order, you see your coffee get made, and then you see the barista turn to somebody and say, hey, can you double check this coffee for me and make sure I made it right? That would strike you as odd, right? Or, oh, hey, yeah, I have your coffee ready, but I'm gonna have to run it to my manager and get their approval on it, and they might have to send it to their supervisor to get, you know, that second level of approval. Or watching your barista say like, oh yeah, I have your order, but I'm gonna have to go across the street and get the beans, so I'll be right back. And then when I get back, I'm gonna have to go get the cups. They're in the back room. That sort of disorganization, or having them say, you know, I'm batching orders right now, so I'm gonna make all 15 coffees at once. You're number 3 in line, so you know it's gonna be a little bit of a wait for you. Or the opposite of that is great news. You can get your coffee now. It's the 15th one I made, so it's been sitting out the longest, but it's yours. So that kind of, when you think of it that way, it's a little bit absurd to think about it. And you know, obviously, we're doing work that isn't making a cup of coffee. We're dealing with the public's money in procurement. But really, when you break these processes down, when you look at it that way, it is kind of, it can get silly at times. Why are we having people double check other people's work who are fully capable of doing that work? And when you think of a barista, if they make a coffee incorrect, they get feedback that, hey, you know what, I want a refund on this. They're probably going to get trained on, oh, here's what you did wrong. Here's how to make it right. I think we can all agree on that. And, you know, outside of our work environment, that's what we see in our personal life. We need to bring that kind of approach into, and it's hard. We're in government. Things are done. We're very risk averse. We don't want to always try new things, but there is a way that we can adopt and kind of foster this culture. And that's where continuous improvement methodologies come in. So great, now what? What do I do? It all sounds fantastic. How can I apply that to what I do in my office? Well, I want you to try this at home. So pick a process. You know, when you're done, think about things that you do on a pretty repetitive basis. Maybe it's something that some level of approval that you add to a document, or it's something your team does, but pick a process that you do fairly regularly, draw it out. So process mapping, this is a big deal. And when we were looking at alternate procurements in our internal group, all we did was sit in a conference room, just got the whole team together, sat in a conference room. I had a marker and a whiteboard and said, okay, when we get these alternate procurement requests, what's the first thing we do? Oh, it goes to a contracting officer. Okay, great. Draw that up on the whiteboard. Contracting officer, and then they do what? Well, they review it. Okay, review. Do they have questions? Yes. Okay. If they have questions, what happens? It goes back to the agency. They communicate with the agency. And so we just went through that process step by step and drew it out. And what's amazing about mapping out a process is you see steps that maybe nobody knew existed, or that nobody knew where it was happening, and now you can see it. And so especially when you start dealing with multiple agencies, you know, procurement works a lot with finance, right, or our fiscal office. When you map out a process, you'll get to see all of those interfaces where we might send something to finance and then, you know, wait for them to do something. If we have them in the room, they can tell us, oh, this is what we're looking at, and then we send it back to you. And so we go back and forth that way to in this process map to make sure that we capture everything and can see it. And so it's really important then to have the people doing all pieces of the work in the room. So in this case, for our alternate procurements, we knew, okay, this is the team. This is the whole team that reviews these. What do we do? When we looked at things like e-procurement that involve finance, we had people from agency finance offices on that team. And they could tell us, okay, well, if you're going to do that, this is how it affects us on the finance side. So that's just drawing it out. It sounds more, I think I just made it sound more complicated than it needs to be, but really at its most simple, if you're looking at a process that you do just personally, you could just take a piece of paper and just map out what you do. The whole goal is to make the invisible visible so that you can address it. Once you have that process mapped out, now you can go back, use that downtime acronym, and identify the waste. Where do you see motion being added? Where do you see defects most frequently, and how can we address those? So again, for our alternate procurement process, we would see a lot of typos, or a lot of, our favorite was the date required, basically the deadline that this needed to be turned around in was ASAP. Okay, as soon as possible. What does that mean? It means nothing, right? As soon as possible. Well, okay, we'll get to it when we can. What we did to address like that one particular tiny little issue, we really use those deadlines to prioritize our workload. So in the form we developed, you can only enter a date, things like that. You can only enter a dollar amount where dollar amounts are asked for. You know, we have drop-down boxes for agencies, so it makes it as easy as possible on the user, and it makes it as easy as possible for us when we get these forms. So identifying the waste, where can mistakes be made? How can we, you know, make the transfer of the information faster? And how can we push these approval levels and the responsibility to the levels that really are doing the work and hold those positions responsible for that work? And then education, you know, how can we educate people on what their job really is? So once you've picked a process, you've drawn it out, you've gone through and identified the waste, everything that's left over is going to be value added, right? Those are steps that actually add value or transform that process. Or this is a fun one, non-value added but necessary. So in our world, in public procurement, we have laws and regulations and policy. Sometimes we can change those. Sometimes we have to live with them. If we can change them, we should see if we can get leadership on board with doing that, if it would make the process more efficient. If we can't do that, sometimes it's just not feasible. It's waste, but it's necessary. So, you know, we might have to keep that in our new process. But start with a blank slate. We call it a clean sheet redesign. Just start over and say, okay, in a perfect world, how does this process start? And then for each step that you add, make sure that it's adding value. If there's waste that you see there, ask, how can we reduce that? So draw out a blank slate and really aim to transform the process. That's our end goal. We want to delight the customer. We want them to go, wow, that went really well. So that's our end goal, delivering value, eliminating waste. Some tips, when you go to try this at home, don't force change. This is a cultural movement, really. You're trying to foster an environment that looks for these kinds of opportunities and celebrates them. And that's not going to happen overnight. In fact, it may take years, you know, probably 2, 3, 4, 5 years to really start seeing where people are like, hey, here's the process. I think we can make this change. Can we make it happen? You know, it's going to take time. Change is hard. Don't force it. I mean, think about the last time you moved from one house to another. How many times do you try to take that old road back or the old way to your old house, right? So we're asking people to do that in something that they do every single day. So it's hard, and we need to recognize that when we're introducing these kinds of new processes or new way of thinking about how we can approach our work. Start small. We started with that really small internal piece of a process and then turned around and worked with our agencies. All right, we can turn these around in a matter of days or a matter of hours within our office, but we're seeing delays outside of our office. Agencies, how can we help you? And so we work with them. Okay, we have this working really well. Where are you running into problems? Oh, our project manager, they don't always understand the process. Do you have educational guides? Well, no, we don't, but we can create those. And so that kind of just iterative, we're always making incremental improvements to the process. It saved us a lot of time. Celebrate successes. We have a lot of high fives in our office. Oh, you found this, we made it happen, awesome. Or you found this and we can't quite make it happen right now, but that's great. We're gonna put that on the to-do list and try to make it happen as soon as we can. So celebrate the success, engage those doing the work. We don't want to be any of us saying, oh, hey, I thought of this great idea to improve the work that you do on a daily basis. Nobody, I would venture to guess that nobody on this webinar likes being told that the process they do has been changed without any of their input. It happens for sure, but it's not the best. And maybe that change, if we had had input, we could have pointed out some drawbacks or some other ways to approach it. So engage those actually doing the work. And really, like, the whole goal of this, encourage and foster a continuous improvement, or CI, a continuous improvement environment. That's where you're going to start driving that culture of always looking for what can we improve and how can we do it. And then lastly, focus on progress, not perfection. There are so many ways to say this. Don't let perfection be the enemy of progress. There are a lot of quotes and idioms around it. Forget perfection and focus on optimal. Like, no matter what you do, you want to make sure that you're moving forward, that you're making these incremental steps towards improving a process or improving how you approach work. So focus on that. If it's a baby step, that's great. We say around our office, 2 steps forward and 1 step back is fine. No steps forward is not fine. That's where, we kind of sit and revert to, oh, this is what we've always done because it's more comfortable, or that's how somebody, showed us how to do it 30 years ago. And in procurement, we run into that a lot. We have Band-Aids on our processes because, there was a controversy at some point. And sometimes it makes a lot of sense. Sometimes it's, a lot of work for something that happened one time out of, tens of thousands of iterations. So focus on that progress, not perfection. And if you're inspired by the ideas here, if you're inspired by learning about what constitutes waste and how we can, make things better, there is a ton of information out there about continuous improvement methodologies. And this is the path that we went down. And if it works for you, that is awesome. That we want this to be, as transferable as we can. I think there's a huge opportunity for continuous improvement within public procurement. And, myself and a couple of colleagues dove into continuous improvement. We took courses, we ran these Kaizen events, we put together a portfolio, we sought our certification in Six Sigma. When you hear Lean Six Sigma or Kaizen, it sounds intimidating. They're just tool sets. When you look at them, it's, things like brainstorming and, diagramming the ideas that you came up with. It's none of it is super complicated. It's just a matter of researching how to do it, trying it out. It won't be perfect at first, and that's great. It may never be perfect. You shouldn't, go down that road, but you want to try it. You want to, put that effort out there, put your toe in the water and see how it is. But this, what you're seeing on the screen, a Google search on continuous improvement methodologies, you can see 235 million results. You can dive in, you can go on rabbit trails on any of those. There's a ton of videos on YouTube that walk through kind of at a high level what Lean and Six Sigma and Kaizen is. There's all sorts of materials here. The state may have a Lean office or a team that is actively pursuing Lean. You can wait for them to come to you, or within procurement, you can, start looking at your processes and say, hey, what's in our power and what would have a big impact on the work we do. So really, at the end of the day, what we have found and what I think you would find is as you start on this journey of continuous improvement and you start working on building this culture, you start talking with your employees, your team, your colleagues, your peers about, hey, here's, I think a way to do something better that would be more efficient, save some time, can we try it? You start doing that and you start focusing more on delivering value. It's a good feeling. You'll be happier, your team will be happier, your peers will be happier, and ultimately, the end result is that our customers, or the public, and everybody that we deal with will be, happier with the production, the job that we're doing for them. So that's what I encourage you to take a look. I encourage you to start with a small project, and that's my challenge to you, is to go and make at least one improvement to some process that you do on a daily basis and just see how it works. Yeah, that's what I wanted to share with you today, is that, it's not impossible to recreate what we've been doing here, and it's actually quite simple, and I would encourage you to do so. So that's my presentation, and I'll turn it back over to Stephanie. I think we had some questions come in, and this is our Q&A period.
Yes, thank you so much, Jason. I have a few questions for you. Let's start with this first one. What was the hardest hurdle to overcome when redesigning your e-procurement system, and how did your office address it?
Wow. Well, so we had our system in place. It was a matter, and we have 15 different executive branch agencies all using it in their own way. So when we mapped out this process, we had a process for health and social services and a different one for natural resources. So the hardest part, I think there were two kind of difficult parts. Was one, getting everybody to agree on one process. And the way, when we run a Kaizen event, which is how we kind of got this team together and put this process together, everybody has a voice, and it's a safe space to say, I think this is what we should do. Well, if you do that, then this is the impact to us. And, you have facilitators that kind of walk through the various viewpoints and hopefully come to an agreement on, okay, this is the step we're going with. Everybody on board with it. Awesome. Next step. And so getting that buy-in is what, got everyone to agree that, yes, this is the standard process we want to aim for. And to get more specific, the most difficult conversation we had was, so this is our first e-procurement system. Basically, there's a way to do a request within the system, or some agencies still have a paper request. Like, I'm an end user and I need I need a pencil. You can either initiate that request in system or out of system. We didn't quite come to agreement on how to address that. And what we ended up with was a compromise, which was some agencies, you have the option to do it out of system and continue doing it paper-based because that's what works for you. And other agencies are doing it in system. The end goal is for everybody to use system. And so when we revisit this process again, we'll look at that and say, hey, are the agencies still using paper? Is that still something that needs to happen, or can we move that in system? So more technically, that was probably the biggest hurdle for us. And we addressed that just by, on the future state, that's the only piece that kind of pops out of that agencies have the option to pop out of the system on.
Okay, great. The second question is how important is standardized processes to have in place for review?
Standard work or standardized processes, it's super important in terms of when we're looking at continuous improvement, and having a standard process across an enterprise or across an agency. The really cool thing about a standardized process is when there's a problem, it's very easy to determine where that problem originated. It's much easier. anyways, relative to having 15, 30, 40 different ways to do something and something goes wrong. You don't know which, of that spaghetti of processes that error occurred. But when you have a standard, you can say, oh, this problem happened. Let's look where in the process it happened. Here it is. Oh, and here's what caused it. Defects tend to stand out more in a standardized process, and they tend to be a little bit easier to solve. And if you have everybody starting from a standardized process, so I would say very important.
Okay, and we have one more question, and that is, it says, we all know that in state government, documentation is everything. When you began reviewing your office's current processes, did you find a lot of duplicating in documentation?
Yes, and that it is true. I mean, it's beaten into our heads that, document, but when you get to a point, and I'll share on our alternate procurement process, one of the things that when we drew it out on a whiteboard, we would have, so basically what would happen, an agency would submit a request with, a narrative, like a cover page on the front that said, here's what we want to do and why. And one of our contracting officers would read that and then paraphrase it. They would say, here's what the agency wants to do and why. Sometimes it got to the point of even copying and pasting some of the paragraphs out, because that's a really good way of saying what the agency needs and why. So they would, get this narrative, basically rewrite the narrative in their own words, and then give it to a manager to review, and then it would come to me. So we were duplicating information and duplicating documentation, and then adding approval layers, that didn't really need to be there. I can trust our contracting officers to do a thorough review of the information that the agency gave us. So we have now that what we were able to do just by, mapping that out and seeing like, oh, contracting officers, do you think that you're adding value by rewriting what the agency wrote? No. What if we didn't have to do that anymore? It saves time. And so now we ask for only what's needed. And it turns out that the narrative that was coming in, I mean, we didn't really need that anyways, because it doesn't comply with it's not useful under our statute. So we were able to eliminate that and then put back onto the agency the responsibility to give us the right information. And now if we don't get it, we send it back to them. Whereas before we would call them up and maybe spend 3 weeks helping them collect or telling them what information to collect. Now we teach them what information we need, and they are responsible for collecting it. And if they have a hard time, of course, we can always answer questions and help them. But instead of, getting 1 page and then we help build out, 30 pages, it's, well, you're trained and you know how this works and you know what information we need. We're going to, give this back to you, and, you can work. So that may have been a little bit more detailed than was asked for, but we tried to eliminate as much of the duplication as we could, while still maintaining the level of information we needed to make a decision.
All right, that is all the questions that I have for our presentation today, and this will conclude our Cronin Award webinar. Jason, thank you so much for your time and sharing your knowledge and experience with everyone. And to all of our attendees, I hope you all enjoyed learning more from Jason and his state submission on continuous improvement. And like I said, that is all we have for today. So I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Stephanie.